And as we move towards the end of our summit, we still have 2 more panel discussions for you. The first one will be on smart contracts and artificial intelligence. And it's a very interesting discussion. Would love to call on stage the moderator, Jack Schickler, one of the speakers, Lee Schneider, and then we'll be joined online by 2 more speakers, especially, and I see them both connected. So thanks a lot for your patience also. I will let the moderator introduce you properly. But yes, let's get started so that we have then one final panel before our networking drinks. Enjoy, guys. Thank you so much. Big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you who've stayed just for this panel on smart contracts. And I'm sure you've all just stayed for this panel, not for the free drinks at the end, right? Yeah, good. Well, anyway, we'll keep you warm until the drinks are ready with what does promise to be a very interesting discussion on, we've been spending a couple of days talking about lots of exciting new technologies, crypto, DeFi, Web3, but one of the key technologies they all depend on is smart contracts. So kind of contracts that are governed not by lawyers and people deciding when contracts are being fulfilled, but automatically by software protocols that can release funds when certain conditions have been met. And I'm joined here by an excellent panel, 2 virtually. We have Dirk Staudenmayer from the European Commission, who is the head of unit responsible for contract law in the Justice Department of the Commission. And I'm told, Dirk, that you have to leave at 5, so we'll try and structure the discussion accordingly. I have with me Lee Schneider, General Counsel for Ava Labs, and also joining virtually Thibault Schrepel from the University of Amsterdam, who in fact wrote a report for the Commission telling them exactly what they should do to regulate smart contracts. So I'm sure he'll be talking us through that during this panel. Dirk, if I can start with you, as you have to leave early. Can you just set out, why are we having this discussion? Smart contracts are all very well, but what policy issues might they raise, and how might the Commission feel it needs to deal with those policy issues?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. That's great. And I just apologize in advance, but because of the time lag, I will have to leave at 5 to 5, basically, because I have another meeting. Initially, it was scheduled that the panel ends at 4:45. Okay, so basically, you may know that the Commission has done a kind of a technical regulation, or at least an attempt to a technical regulation in the Data Act on smart contracts. But we're also looking at the legal sides and what smart contracts can do there. And we are very encouraged by the European Parliament, who has given us $500,000 to run a pilot project. The Parliament can ask the Commission to do very specific things they're very interested in, and they have asked us to do this on smart contracts. And this pilot project will have 2 legs. The first one is a more classical internal market one, and a more horizontal one. It's the question, if you want to promote smart contract as a tool to make it easier for businesses, especially SMEs, to cut the red tape in contract conclusion and contract performance, then the question is, are there rules in national private laws which prevent exactly that? And there are some. And just to give you an example, there are form requirements. For instance, if you say, well, there has to be a written requirement. Written means on paper and signed. Yeah. For instance, of commercial instruments like a bill of lading or something, if you say that has to be done in writing, then you cannot tokenize the goods. And that may be a problem. So that is the first aspect we are looking at. The second aspect we are looking at is less classical, is horizontal market, and more interesting. So I spend a few minutes about that, if I may. Mm-hmm. So that is looking at smart contracts as a tool for data management. So that can first of all be a tool for personal data management. Because at the moment, basically, if I as a data subject have given my agreement that somebody else has used my data, and if they don't do something particularly stupid, so send me advertising, for instance, from somebody who I've never given that person my consent, Yeah, then I won't know what's happening with my data, and I have difficulties to control it, and I don't get anything from it. And here, smart contracts will come in. Smart contracts would be the technology-driven tool which replaces intermediaries, which are now regulated by the Data Governance Act, and which also can do the same task, but replaces intermediaries and allow the data subject to control the data itself and to get something out of it. So if you have stored your data in the blockchain, then basically you have a kind of a template which you fill out and which just says, I am giving consent to this person or this company to use my data for this duration, for this purpose, and I get this out of it. And then if that company or person steps over the line, the smart contract cuts it automatically off. That's the idea. And that's where checking in terms of feasibility and whether this needs to be framed for doing this. So that's the first interesting aspect for data management. And the second interesting aspect for data management tool is on the business side. The Data Act gives a right to access and share data. So let's say you are in a classical tripartite scenario. You have a data holder, for instance, a car company. Yeah, you have a data user, that the car user, that is a consumer, and you have a third party. Now, at the moment, when you buy a new car, 4 to 5 gigabyte daily are passed on to the data holder, that is the car company. And you have given consent, and then you don't get anything for it, and you don't know what's happening. However, there are many people who are interested in your data. There could be the insurance company who is interested to give you a tailor-made insurance policy. And there could be, say, an independent repair company, because very soon in your car, there will be a screen and will says the profile of your tires in the back is less than the prescribed minimum. Please go to the dealer of your confidence, which happens to be the credit dealer of the car producer. And if you replace 2 tires, it costs you X. And if you replace all 4 tires, which remain, it costs you Z. And that means that independent repair companies are completely shut out of the market because they have no access. That's what the Data Act deals with. And it helps those to get access to the data.
And you.
But how will be? I'm just sorry, just one sentence, and I will finish. And then basically, how will the data holder run this? Because they will get tens of thousands of these requests, or hundreds of thousands of requests, if you have a big fleet like Volkswagen, for instance. And then you can only handle this through smart contracts. And that is the second tool we're looking at. Sorry for being a bit long.
Well, I think it was worth dwelling on because there's some very interesting issues there on legal obstacles and data control. You mentioned the Data Act in particular, which the Commission proposed in February and is currently going through the legislative sausage machine right now. Could you just sort of briefly say, because I know there are some provisions in that legislation specifically about smart contracts. Could you set out what those are and what the intention of them is?
The provisions on smart contracts, which are in there, are trading very carefully on only dealing with technical aspects. We have intentionally left out provisions which deal with the legal aspects of smart contracts, the aspects I was just talking about, basically. So for the moment, the idea about smart contracts is just you can use them, they can be relevant for reducing costs. There's some technical standardization there, but the legal aspects are left out because we did not want to overcharge the boat. And that's what we're looking at now. And that will be for a midterm perspective. And I'm particularly pleased to be here at this conference because I would very much like the associations and the members of these associations to contact us and to see whether they are concerned by this, whether they want to use smart contracts in these ways. Because what we don't want to do is a solution in search of a problem. We want to help the use of smart contracts. So basically here to the audience and all of those participating, we would be very interested to be in contact with you and have a policy dialogue with you on that.
Okay, well, I'm sure that offer will be very welcome to those watching. I'm going to turn to Thibault now, because you wrote a report but for the Commission, which I think turned a year today. You wrote it in October 2021, saying what you thought the Commission should do in this area. Are you pleased with how that's been received? Has your advice been taken up? Do you agree with that analysis of the Data Act containing some purely technical issues?
So typical answer by a law professor, yes and no. Yes, I'm pleased. And I think we have to realize that what Dirk just mentioned is very unique, right? This is something I've called law plus technology. And this is not something that most regulators would do. We tend as lawyers to approach problem in a way that is legal solutionism. So we tend to use the law to solve legal problems, and that's it. And here, what we hear, and indeed what the Data Act is trying to achieve, is how to use the tech to better ensure or enforce some of the rights that we may have. And that's very unique. And indeed, I agree that the Data Act is just tackling the technical aspects, which might be what we want to do. Now, my concern is whether or not Article 30, to be very specific, is enabling that law plus technology approach, or if it goes a step too far. So I'm going to try my best to make it concrete. So this is just a draft. Of course, we could always discuss the way it is drafted. I'm concerned, for instance, about the term, the robustness of a smart contract. It says that it should be no bug. There are questions as to who has the burden of proof, but I'm sure all of that will be solved. Now, the very idea of Article 30 says that you should basically, if you run a smart contract to move data from point A to B, have a kill switch function. So the ability to stop the smart contract. Now, it doesn't say who should be behind the kill switch function, if it should be the creator of the smart contract, if we should open the door to the regulators or not. And generally speaking, my concern, it might be necessary, but I think it's a bit the extreme solution, and there are other ways and less coercive solutions that we could explore, in my opinion. What you do with that provision, if it's in the final version, is that from a Darwinian perspective, you kind of eliminate, or at least reduce, what differentiates smart contract from non-smart contract or contract outside the blockchain, right? So the immutability is basically gone as a principle. Now, and I won't be long, but I think there are other things we could try, and to be, again, as specific as possible. Something that I mentioned to the Commission that I called, and I'm not the only one, pragmatic immutability might be not to alter immutability as a general principle, because I think it has to stay. Otherwise, why would you use a smart contract? But to do it on a more case-by-case basis. So, for instance, it seems to me that something you may want to do, if indeed it is necessary to sometimes stop smart contracts or to remove them, whatever it means, is to use the oracles. Something we could do is to say, okay, we have a smart contract. We send the provisions of the smart contract to an oracle that will check whether or not it complies with EU regulation. And depending on what the oracle will tell you, then you can activate the smart contract or not. And it seems to me that this kind of solution will be more tailored to each of the specific cases, where you could indeed say, for certain big smart contract that we know will be used millions, if not billions of times, we want to run this kind of solution, but without, again, coming up with a principle that will impact all of the smart contracts. My concern is that if you do so, you also remove the good things coming with immutability. Just one example, and I'm done. We talk a lot about AI and the fact that it may discriminate, or that if it's unsupervised, it may lead to outcomes that are racist and discriminatory and all the things we don't want. Where you could use smart contracts is a way to document the way the AI system is working, to document the database. And if you have a smart contract that is immutable, in case there is a problem, you know for a fact that the company running the AI system can't just go to the database and delete the information that led the AI system to misbehave. Again, if you remove immutability, it may mean that the company will then, after a problem, go to the database and change, the data. So I understand the reason, and I understand that we need consumer protection and sometimes to address the issues coming with immutable smart contracts. But it might be that there are other ways, less coercive, that we could try. And if it doesn't work, then yes, let's go for Article 30.
Okay, so some clear concerns there about the approach the Commission has taken, undermining the very nature of smart contracts, and an alternative proposal to use oracles, which, for those who don't know, are the bits that kind of link the blockchain-based decision making with the outside world. So check on any external factors that might link to the conditions of the smart contract. I just want to quickly turn to Lee before Dirk has to go, and what we've heard about this idea of having a kill switch in smart contracts that's been proposed here in the EU. Does that sound like a sensible idea to you? Does that sound like it fixes the problem?
I don't know if
Is the mic on?
I don't know if a kill switch fixes the problem or not. What I'm more concerned about is the liability question.
There's a little switch on the top. Yeah, you're like your mic has been kill switched. I'm afraid. I'm not sure if that was under the EU Data Act or some other piece of legislation, but we've got you an alternative.
It's always the danger when you talk about complex texts such as blockchain, and then
right.
I've been in this situation many times where I couldn't work out the coffee machine.
Right. Even technologists have their message.
As long as they don't hit my kill switch, I think we'll be okay. Or at least I'll be okay. Look, I think kill switches probably have their place. Maybe during the robot apocalypse, I'll be especially happy for kill switches, which is why I prefer the robot apocalypse to the zombie apocalypse. But the questions that I focus on really are more the liability questions. So, for example, if somebody is harmed by the functioning of the smart contract, the kill switch may stop later people from being harmed, but it doesn't provide for compensation for the people who've already been harmed. And these questions around how to establish who makes compensation, if anybody at all, in connection with the functioning of autonomously functioning code like a smart contract, those to me are the really interesting questions. I know that the Commission has made some proposed directive on AI liability and presumptions, rebuttable presumptions of fault in connection with AI-related activities. I don't know that there's a similar move in connection with smart contracts. Look, I think we're going to have to grapple with these issues in a much greater way in the very near future, because AI and machine learning are already making decisions independent of what the programmers may have originally intended. Smart contracts are making decisions typically in keeping with what the programmers had intended, but what I do with the smart contract may not always be what I intended to do. So we have a lot of complicated liability questions to think about here, and I frankly don't know that anybody has come up with good answers yet.
We've just lost Dirk, so I am unfortunately not going to be able to give him a chance to respond to some of those points. But Thibault, please comment
on that point. I think indeed it's a very interesting question, and the interactions between all those questions and regulations we may have for smart contract and the AI Act are extremely interesting. The AI Act, basically, as it stands, again, just a draft, tells you that basically every piece of software in Europe is covered by the AI Act. I think, such as it is, you could go to the Annex 1 of the AI Act. It does cover smart contract. And if you try to comply with the AI Act for your smart contract, you will find yourself in a very difficult position, because the AI Act is meant for centralized system. Something else, it tells you that those systems should run in a way that is free of error and non-discriminatory. But for you to achieve that and have the database that represents the entire population, well, you may need to have the data that is very personal, and therefore to infringe GDPR. So you see that all of those acts are actually coming together. And I think it's good that we are talking about smart contract regulation in perspective with the other regulations, because indeed, it's not going to be just siloed. and something we may want to do, one technology at a time.
I'm sure if Dirk was here, he'd say he works very closely with his colleagues from other parts of the Commission, because different parts of the Commission are responsible for legislating on crypto, on decentralized finance, on Web3, on data protection, on smart contracts. But as practitioners, do you accept that argument? There's been this maze of legislation trying to regulate the digital world, and does it all fit together?
So maybe I'll go first to respond to that. It's very hard to figure out how it should all fit together. And we've been used to living in a world where, by and large, there's no liability associated with software, right? When I download an app, if you bother to read the terms and conditions for the apps that you download onto your device, you'll by and large find out that here's a piece of software. It may or may not do what it's supposed to do. If it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, we're terribly sorry about that, but you're not going to get any compensation from us. And living in that kind of a world has been sort of okay so far, because we have expectations of centralized actors, even though they're not codified in law. When you get to something like artificial intelligence, when you get to something like smart contracts, any other type of autonomously functioning code, you don't have that centralized player to make it better for you. And so these are going to be important questions. And unfortunately, the history of the law so far about software doesn't point us in any good directions, because it's mostly allowed software creators to exclude all liability.
The thing I'm often struck by when talking about, and the bit of smart contracts I most often see, is decentralized finance. And just a few weeks ago, we saw this exploit with the Mango protocol, where hundreds of millions of dollars were taken. And depending on who you ask, you get a very different explanation of what went on there. For some people, it was a hack, it was a theft of this money. For other people, for the guy who says he did it, he said, we executed a highly successful trading strategy on this protocol. So for him, he would just looked at what the code said, realized that you could do this thing with the code, and he did it. Do we kind of need a better way of talking about what's going on these smart contracts, maybe to determine when something that for some people may seem morally wrong or legally dubious, for other people is just gaming the system in a way that is acceptable? Do you think regulators are capable of getting to grips with that?
I'm not sure that humans are capable of coming to grips with that, right? One of the things that drives innovation.
Regulators are human too.
Well,
I just have to say.
Fair enough. Maybe we'll have regulation by artificial intelligence one day, so we'll see about that. That will definitely require a kill switch, but that operated by me, of course, as emperor of the universe.
Fair enough.
These are very difficult questions, right? And in the context of lost money, people may just say, well, okay, that was lost money. But if that were to happen in the context of physical injury or displacement of people or other larger social issues, we may have a very different reaction to what happens then. The way that I've sort of been thinking about the liability question so far is to have some kind of insurance, some kind of guarantee fund that can offer the recompense to people. And when I look at things like national health insurance, which of course my country doesn't have, but many other countries do, right? Providing certain minimum insurance standards for people in the event that something bad happens to them. Those are the best ideas that I've come up with so far in how we might approach these issues.
Okay, still at an early stage. And another thing that gets to me in this debate is, you're talking about protocols that could be used anywhere in the world between counterparties who are perhaps anywhere in the world. I'm sure Dirk's doing his best, but he's only responsible for the EU. Does it make sense for kind of regulators in individual jurisdictions to work in this area, or does it need some kind of international set of rules to determine how this is going to work? Thibault.
Yeah, to react to what you said, indeed, this idea that the has been called the code of law. So this idea is very strong in the blockchain environment, that what the code says should be legal. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's exactly what the person or the group behind the DAO tax said at the time. I recovered the message on the forum. It says, I'm making use of this explicitly coded feature as per the smart contract terms, and my law firms advise me that my actions are fully compliant with the US regulations, right? The problem with that is that every strategy that is coming from outside the code will therefore go unpunished, right? If you only rely on the code. And sometimes the code is inefficient because you could code the environment, but if something is coming from outside, you may want more than the code. So then we go to the legal system. And the question is, which one is applying to all of our questions? And this requires, I think, technical knowledge. And the point I made to the European Commission is that, and I'm not 100% confident, but you can make a point that every smart contract is by definition cross-border. I will explain why. And if that is so, it means that you cannot apply the law of just one country. You need to go to the international treaties to know where then you should go back and apply the law to. The reasons is that you define cross-borders by two elements. One is legal. So you look where are the elements of the contract, and the other one is economic. Do we see economic value going from borders to borders? I think you can make a point that for every smart contract, you have no idea where the nodes are, where the miners, the validators might be, and that therefore they might be in another country, which make the transaction international, right? It's actually operating the transaction, which is a step further than just using a MasterCard, where everything happens in the same country. If so, it means that we could talk about EU regulation all we want, or regulation for Belgium, but international regulations will apply, and it's interesting to know where they will actually direct you. So to answer your question, I think in any case we have to already consider international law, although it seems that we are tackling domestic issues, but I think in nature they are not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've just got in a few minutes before this panel has to end. I'd like to take a step back as well a bit, because sometimes I hear we're talking about the regulation of smart contracts, but I hear other people saying maybe smart contracts are never gonna work anyway. That Caroline Wilkins from the Bank of England the other week was saying, actually you're always going to need centralized decision making. Governance is crucial to companies and to most organizations that we set up. And when the governance doesn't work, the organization collapses. And at some level, you need to have a decision-making body that can decide what to do, because there's always going to be uncertain events, and you can't have a protocol that kind of predicts everything.
Was she talking about smart contracts or the British government?
Well, unless it was an elaborate metaphor, she was talking about smart contracts. But you do make a fair point. She was talking about smart contracts in decentralized finance. But there is this question out there among some people who say, is this ever a model of governance that can work, and therefore is it worthwhile us figuring out how to help it to work?
My answer would be yes. I think we need to have these kinds of experiments. The DAO panel, by the way, I thought covered these issues from a very interesting perspective. I personally am not necessarily convinced that DAOs are the way to do anything, but the idea of allowing for programming to do certain activities makes a lot of sense to me. The idea that sometimes that has to be corrected also makes a lot of sense to me. And the question to me is really, how do we calibrate when it's right to be fully automated versus partially automated with kill switches or whatever versus not automated at all? And these are going to be important questions. They're also going to be important questions because there will be people who want everything to be governed by code is law. And the three of us may think that that's not the right way to go. but there's a good argument why, if that's what those people want, we should let them have what they want.
Thibault, there was a kind of a mixed response
Yeah.
there from you, but what's your...
So I'm not sure if you can make a point that smart contract won't work or DeFi won't work. Maybe it will disappear in 10 years. But if you look at some blockchains, I do have the numbers for the Binance Smart Chain. In just the month of May of 2021, 1.4 billion transactions automated by smart contracts. So again, it might disappear, but to some degree, it is working and it is scaling. Now, the question is whether or not it will replace the centralized world. I don't think so. Indeed, she might be right in her declaration in saying that basically there are transaction costs that you may only reduce in a centralized way. That's the paper from Bruno Coase. It's a very old idea. It's come from the 30s, right? It's the fact that you can direct people, save on transaction costs. No need to negotiate. No need to find the people. On the other end, there are other ways to reduce transaction costs in a decentralized manner. And to quote another Nobel laureate, you could go to the work of Eleanor Ostrom, a great economist, and she showed that there are ways more decentralized by which you can reduce transaction costs. So my thinking is that the two may coexist and may fulfill different needs, right? For certain transactions, it doesn't make sense to use a centralized way of performing. For some other transactions, it would make sense to use a decentralized one. But again, that idea that it won't work, I think, could be valid 4 years ago, but has been proven wrong actually by the numbers nowadays.
And as a technical matter, if you're relying on what the code says to do everything, in fact, you have fully centralized at that point, right? Because everything is based on the code. That code may be sitting on a decentralized network, and it may not be stoppable by any single authority, but you have centralized the activity within that code. So there's different areas and ways to think about centralization versus decentralization under the circumstances.
Okay, and just to the one final question, would you like to see a regulation in the EU or elsewhere, a single law that says here's how smart contracts need to operate, and when do you think the time will be right to have that kind of law? Thibault.
For a regulation dedicated to smart contracts?
Yeah. Do you think that's a possibility?
That
Is it desirable?
Yeah, we have a bit of a delay. Sorry if I'm slow to answer. I'm not trying to avoid the question. That's an old debate. Lessig, Easterbrook. Do you need specific regulations for new technology, or could you apply the old regulations to new technologies? You made a point that if you start to use horses as a way to move around, you don't need the law of the horse. You could apply contract and torts and liability. I think the same is true for the most part. Where you might, in my opinion, need specific regulation is to create an entry door so that the law, such as it exists already, can apply when necessary. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, for technical reasons, you may have barriers to enforcement. But do you need a regulation that would redraft the entirety of contract law, such as applied to smart contract? No. We have it for millennium, and it works quite well. So I'll be skeptic that we have to rewrite everything.
Okay.
I strongly agree with that. Throughout my journey in blockchain, one point that I've always tried to stress is that blockchain's database technology, right? It's not magic. It's not some new, completely unprecedented way of doing things. And there are lots of existing laws and rules that we can apply straight to blockchain without having to change them. People talk about technology neutral regulation, and that would be great, but we never seem to actually get technology neutral regulation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Thibault joining us. Thanks to the magic of television. Thanks to Lee. Thanks to Dirk, who is no longer joining us, but made an excellent contribution at the start. Thanks for all of you for listening, and thank you to the organizers for orchestrating this excellent panel debate. Thank you.
so much. And thank you everybody again for the great discussion on AI smart contracts. We heard very interesting points actually raised by the European Commission, and then the great discussion by Lee and Thibault. And thank you again, Jack, for the moderation.